I love that intro. I just kind of want to keep listening to it. Which, by the way, that was done by our videographer, Colton. Colton's had a big weekend. He's not here because he got married yesterday. So we will see him in a couple weeks. He's on his honeymoon. So, shadows. Can you think of a time when you were afraid of a shadow? Maybe it was as a kid and the nightlight was shining on something in your room in just such a way that it projected on the wall the image of a monster. I can think back to growing up. We would put these big wooden figures in our yard at Christmas time with our Christmas lights. And so there was a Santa Claus, there was a Christmas tree, there was a sleigh, there were some reindeer. It was all involved. But in order to illuminate those at night, you would have to put spotlights out. And those spotlights would shine on them, but they would also reflect inside the house. And every year without fail, the first couple nights, I would freak out going, what is that thing on my wall? And eventually I would remember, it's the Christmas stuff. But maybe it's from when the street lights showed through a tree and it made it look like a monster. Whatever it is, there's something in us that when we see an image that's not real, when we see a shadow, we often run to that and we take it and we make it a big monster that now is not only on the wall, but it's under the bed and in the closet. But here's the thing about shadows. They're not real. You don't interact with people's shadows. After all, could you imagine going up and introducing yourself to somebody's shadow? We have padded rooms for those kind of people. But how do we figure out what's real? How do we figure out what that image really is? It's really quite simple. We turn on the lights. Because when you turn on the lights, you see things as they really are. Light brings clarity. Have you ever noticed that light always pierces the darkness? So today, we're going to turn on the lights of God's Word. Because many of us have a shadowy view, a shadowy understanding of God. A view that's been influenced by several things. Oftentimes it's relationships, particularly parental relationships. They can affect our view of God. Sometimes it's experiences with other believers of the church. If we grew up in an area that had a bunch of rules, it's likely cast a shadow on our view of God. Sometimes it's false expectations of God. You think God didn't come through as you thought he should. He didn't answer according to your prayers. He didn't answer according to your desires. And it's cast a shadow on who you think God is. Sometimes it's a false understanding of God. We think he's something that he's not and was never meant to be. Right? We think he's a magic genie out to grant our wishes. Or we think he's this ATM that we just come to when we need things. Sometimes it's having a background in other religions and understanding what they say about God, and it's created a shadow on how we view the one true God. One last one that's probably affected all of us in some way, shape, or form is taking our view of God from the culture and saying, well, my God would never, or God doesn't. You see, that leads to this buffet theology where we pick and choose what attributes and characteristics of God we choose to believe in, and we make God to be out to be some kind of Frankenstein. But regardless of how we got there, And it's often a combination of several of these different shadows, if you will. They lead to an inaccurate view of God. And an inaccurate view of God makes us see God as something he's not. It makes him out to be something that he was never meant to be. And what it ultimately does is it provides distance and fracture in our relationship. And so if we think that God is all wrath, or if we think that he is distant and doesn't care, we'll be fearful of him and we won't come to him in confidence. If we think of him as love, but we don't understand what that love truly is, we'll think it's license to do whatever we please because after all, God loves me. A.W. Tozer said that what comes to mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And so if we don't understand God, if we don't have an accurate view of God, how do we approach him in confidence? How do we trust him when the going gets tough? How do we find hope from him? How do we make sense of life when life doesn't make sense? But the more we understand the nature and character of God, the better we relate to him. The deeper our worship will be. And so today, what we want to do is we want to remove the shadows. We want to turn on the lights and let God speak for himself. You see, because God's turned on the lights in two primary ways. The first is through his word. It's inerrant, it's authoritative, it's without error in its original manuscripts, and it's how God has spoken to us. And so we're going to look at what God says about himself in his word, but we're also going to look at the second way, and that's Jesus, the light of the world. And really, this is what we've been doing with God from the beginning of this series, I Am. You see, in week 1, we learned that he is the great I Am. Not the I will be, not the I was, not that I hope at some point to get there, but that he is the I Am. Last week, we saw that God was gracious and merciful. That he's gracious and merciful. And today, we're going to pick up in Exodus 34:6 and probably look at two of the most misunderstood aspects of God's character. And they are his anger and his love. Exodus 34:6 tells us that the Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious. And listen to this, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Pastor Marcus will get to faithfulness next week, but we're going to focus on probably two of God's most misunderstood aspects, and that's his anger and his love. When we view God as angry, right? God is always angry. He's just sitting up there in heaven. He's looking out over us. He's peering down. He's got his eyes on us. And he's just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the moment we screw up, boom, he's going to wipe us out. He's going to be done with us. There's no room for error. He just wants to punish us. After all, this is what we would do. This is what we could do. It might be what you experienced growing up. If you grew up in a home that was high on rules and law, but low on love and grace. Or maybe you grew up in a home with a lot of anger. And so you learned to tiptoe around on eggshells, just trying to avoid the wrath. And you thought everything was all right as long as you didn't mess up. as long as you didn't make a mistake, as long as you didn't get in trouble, things were okay. But because you were walking on eggshells, what you don't realize is that distance was created and the relationship is not as close as it could be. Or maybe you grew up in a home that was all love. And by all love, I mean no rules. And so you could do you. You could be whatever you wanted to be. You could come and go as you please. There were no rules. And so it was love, but that's not love. And so often the way we grew up informs the way we view God. And so for many of us, God is angry. He's looking to wipe us out. He's looking to punish us. But that's not God's anger. You see, that's human anger. And human anger is almost always from a wounded ego. Somebody did something to us. Somebody hurt us. They said something not true. And we respond. We get angry. Of course, preaching on anger, and I told Pastor Marcus this was one of those tough ones, and I couldn't figure out why for the longest time. And then Thursday, I was mowing the yard, and a bunch of things started to replay through my mind throughout the week. And this is just from the last week where God showed me how I had gotten angry. On Monday, I was taking the girls to school, and I had pulled out, and I was driving, and I had a clear path. And I like driving with the clear path. If you're slowing me down, you're doing it wrong. And so I'm driving, and I'm just minding my own business, and all of a sudden, I see this car roll through the stop sign and pull out in front of me. Now, he had some adequate distance. I'll give him that. But he was in my way. And I was angry. I didn't even realize I was angry until the road split to where there were 2 lanes on each side, and I could go around him, and I went and got in front of him just to show him. Don't get in my way. I was angry. The real kicker in the story, you turn out of the neighborhood, and then you have to turn left to drop the girls off at school. And it's not very far. So I had gotten around him, and then I had to get in the left lane, and there was a driver going a little too slow there too. And so what does this guy do? He's in the right lane, and he just drives right on by me. But I thought I proved my point. So that was Monday. Tuesday, one of the girls talked back to me. I didn't yell, didn't scream, I didn't administer discipline, but my ego was wounded and I was angry. Why? Because they didn't recognize me as father and obey me like I thought they should. So that was Tuesday. Wednesday, something didn't happen in the time frame that I thought it should. So I was frustrated and maybe a little angry. And then Thursday, I'm mowing the yard and all this stuff hits me, and I said, I just don't want to pay attention anymore. So I spent the rest of the week with my head buried in the sand until last night watching the Aggies play football. It's been an angry season. Those of us that are Aggies are working through it painfully. But you see, that's human anger. It's from a wounded ego. Somebody said something or did something that we didn't like. But there's another aspect of it as well. And that's that it's often disproportionate to the offense. Somebody does something and the answer is, let's just wipe them out. If you're a parent and you've ever echoed the phrase, I brought you into this world and I can bring you out. disproportionate to the offense. And so our experience with human anger, our own outbursts, they cloud our view of God's anger because our anger is a hair trigger anger. And it happens when we get offended. It happens when things don't go our way. If you've ever had to work with your kids on not responding every time they don't get their way, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes kids are just a reflection of us as adults. But you see, that's not God's anger. Notice what the text says in Exodus 34. God is slow to anger. He's slow to anger, not quick, not hair trigger. He's slow, like a crock pot. I don't know about y'all, but I love a good crock pot meal. You can do a lot in a crock pot. Make a little queso. You can put a bunch of things together and call it a soup. One of the things I like to make is taco soup. So what do? You put the hamburger meat in with the onions. Then you add the different types of beans. Then the corn, then the rotel, a little beef broth, salt and pepper. Set it for 6 hours later, and voila, you got delicious taco soup. See, God's anger is much like that. It's a slow build. It's not that God never gets angry. If we think that God never gets angry, we're misunderstanding the nature and character of God. It's just that it's never a hair trigger reaction because somebody offended God's ego. Can you imagine if that's how God dealt with us? There would be no hope. Dare I say, we wouldn't be here today. Right. You see, because the just thing would be for God to just smite us and wipe us out. But that would leave us with no hope. But God gets angry. It's just that his anger is like the anger of a parent towards a child. You try to point your kids in the right direction. You try to help them make the right decision. And when they don't, the best recourse is often not anger and condemnation, but to come alongside them and to help them course correct. You see, God gets angry. We get angry when we see somebody trying to harm our kids, and that's a justifiable anger. The difference is that God's anger is proportionate. It's on tempo. It's at the right time. And yet it has a greater purpose. You see, God is slow to anger because he's bearing with us, calling us to repentance. Romans chapter 2, verse 4. Or do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? So God's anger is on purpose. It's deliberate and it's under control. We need to understand this about God. It's not that he doesn't have feelings or that things don't grieve him or frustrate him. He's not a robot. He's not distant. He's not detached. It's that he doesn't act according to his feelings, but rather according to his character. His anger is controlled, and it has the goal of leading us back to him, not to wipe us off the face of the earth. It's a self-controlled anger. It's actually one of the attributes that separate the one true God, the God of the universe, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, from all the other gods. Because you see, in almost every other world religion, whether they be monotheistic or polytheistic, whether they have one God or many gods, The gods are almost always angry, and as humans, our job is to try and appease their wrath. And so we walk around on eggshells trying to make sure that we don't upset the gods and hope that they will find favor with us. I don't know about you, but that sounds exhausting. But you see, God's anger is self-controlled, and it's proportional, and it's in response to his nature and character. According to John Mark Comer in his book, God Has a Name, there's 4 different aspects to God's anger. There's present anger, which is when he deals with evil now on this side of Judgment Day. It does happen occasionally, but that is not the norm. There's future anger, when God deals with evil later on the day of judgment, and there will be a day of judgment. There's active anger, when God acts directly to put a stop to things here and now. This is the exception. And the most common one, the one that we probably think about the least though, is passive anger. And this is when God does not act. And God's inaction is the judgment. You see, we think of God's judgment as active when more often it's passive. It's when he lets you keep doing what you're already doing. It's when he takes his hand of blessing all off your life and says, okay, fine, have it your way. You do you. But remember our crock-pot illustration. God's anger is slow and it builds. But eventually the crock-pot finishes cooking and you get to enjoy what's there. Much is the same about God's anger. There will come a time where we will see God's anger. It will eventually come, and we will have to deal with it. And so why does God get angry? He gets angry about things that are affront to his glory and his purposes. And so when he sees evil or injustice, he gets angry. And his anger is a righteous anger because he knows what could be. He knows what will be. And he knows that things are not as they should be. And so we must remember that God is slow to anger. Why? Why is God so slow to anger? It doesn't make sense. If it were us, let's be honest, we would be swift to anger. We would make sure everyone knows that we're in charge. I don't want to speak for you. I would be swift to anger. I would want everyone to know I'm in charge and that they've offended me. Because God's anger is slow, because his desire is to lead us to repentance. And so he bears with us. It's what gives us hope. Joel 2:12 and 13 says, "Yet even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, with mourning, and rend your hearts and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster." Why? Because God's not just slow to anger. That's one aspect of his character. Notice what the rest of Exodus 34b says. He is slow to anger, and he is abounding in steadfast love. You see, God's default towards us is not anger, but love. It's his love that withholds his anger. And so God is love. But it's not love as we think of love. You see, our version of love is that love is licensed to do whatever you want. If it feels good, do it. But that's not the love of God. You see, for many, love has come to mean tolerance. And tolerance isn't anymore an agree to disagree, but tolerance has become that you must agree with me and affirm me for who I think I am or what I think I should be doing. It sounds something like this. Well, who am I to judge? What's good for you is good for you. Let's live and let live. And so we've falsely confused love and tolerance. And when we elevate this view of love, the end result is indifference. And indifference will eventually lead to hate. And when we say that God is love, and if love becomes indifference, then God is indifference, and that's contrary to his nature and character. You see, God is active. God's love is an active love. He is involved in his creation, and he is working his plans and his purposes. And he will not miss on those things. It's a perfecting love. God's perfecting love is pushing us to something greater. For those of us that have a personal relationship with him through Jesus Christ, he's pushing us to look more like Jesus. And if you don't know Jesus, God's love is pushing you to a faith relationship with Jesus Christ. He's bearing with you, giving you the opportunity to confess your sins and put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And so God is love. But it's not just that God is love, it's that he's abounding in love, abounding in steadfast love. That picture of abounding, it's like a mountain spring that doesn't run out of water, and you can just keep coming back to it. It's overflowing with love, and it's steadfast, which means it's consistent. It's not changing on a whim. It's not changing based on how you act towards God. It's not changing on the decision you made last night or what you did at work this week. His love is consistent. It's not simply about you, but it's about him. You see, the Hebrew word there in Exodus 34 for love is hesed love. It's a covenantal love. And when God makes a covenant, he makes it based on who he is, not on what we're going to do. And so God's love is not conditional. You see, so often we have this misplaced view of God's love. And it's often because of something we experienced growing up, right? Sometimes love was conditional. It was based on how we acted. If we followed the rules or if we did well in school or excelled at sports, we got love. If we didn't, we probably got anger and wrath. But I need you to hear me, because there's some of you that have experienced that and it has shaded your view of God's love. God's love is based on his nature, not your actions. He loves you. He's bearing with you. His love is abundant. God's not using love to manipulate you to get his ways. God's using his love to perfect you and make you look more like Jesus. It's a patient love. The love of God is like the love of a parent to a child. At least it's supposed to be like a parent to a child. I had an illustration about riding a bike, but we're not quite there yet with our girls. They still got the training wheels. And so something else came to my mind. Our girls are learning to read. And it's a bumpy road, but they're doing really well at it. But when they come to something new and they mispronounce it, or they don't remember it, or they're trying to figure out what the word is, our response isn't anger and condemnation. We're not sending them to their rooms because they didn't pronounce a word right or that they forgot. What are we doing? We're coming alongside them. We're helping them pronounce it. And we're saying, let's keep working. Let's keep going. Let's keep learning together. Hey, try to pronounce it this way. Try to do it this way. That's what God's doing with you. He's coming alongside you as a loving father. When you mess up, he's picking you up. He's wrapping you in his arms. He's wiping off your knee, cleaning it up, and saying, let's keep going. I have more for you. There's a hope. There's a future. There's a promise. You see, as a parent, when your child falls down, you don't scold them. You don't tell them what a failure they are or how disappointed in them you are. You bend down, you pick them up, you clean them off, and you say, let's keep trying. That's what God's love does. It pushes us to keep going. We said it a minute ago, but it bears repeating. God's love is a perfecting love, not a pampering love. Let me say that again. God's love is a perfecting love, a purifying love, not a pampering love, which means that God loves you as you are, but he loves you way too much to keep you there. He's bearing with you to drive you, to make you look more like Jesus or to come to know him. And so what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with you and me? You see, we often make God out to be something he's not. We feel the need to mold and shape him to our likeness. And if we were to turn back just a little bit from Exodus 34 to Exodus 32, we would see this taking place. You see, in Exodus 32, Moses has gone back up the mountain to talk to God. But here's where the problem set in. Moses didn't come back down the mountain in the time that the people thought he should. So you would think they would just wait patiently. God's going to respond, right? But that's not what they do. That's not what we typically do. You see, what they did is they started to form and fashion a God of their own doing. A God that could fit in their box, a God that they could wrap their mind and their arms around, a God that made sense to them. And they used Aaron the priest to accomplish this. Because Aaron asked them to give him all their gold, and they formed this golden calf. And what do? They worship it as a representation of God. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound like something we do? Because what we tend to do is we say, well, my God would never. Or I don't think I could worship a God that's like this. But the reality is, we do it all the time. And what it tells us is that God sees this, and he tells Moses to go down to his people because they have corrupted themselves. And in Exodus 32:8, it says, they have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshiped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And it tells us that God's anger burns against them. And he wants to take them out because they are rebellious towards him. You see, the people couldn't see God, so they created a God they could see. And this is something we do. We create God in our imagination. And we can tend to live by our imagination and not God's revelation. One of the desires of our preaching team, one of the heart of our pastor is that we would have a big view of God. We want us to understand God as he has revealed himself to be, not as we have imagined him to be. And so when we come up against the Word of God and we see contradictions between how God has revealed himself and how we view him, it's on us to transform. It's on us to change because God is unchangeable. And often, the two biggest ways we have faulty views of God are according to his anger and according to his love. And so we think that God is out there looking to play whack-a-mole, just looking to wipe us out. Or we think God's love, and so we can just do what we want, and God's okay with it. But what the Bible tells us is that God is slow to anger, and he's abounding in steadfast love. How does that work? It doesn't really make sense. How can you be both slow to anger? How can you get angry and be overflowing in love? How do those two things go together? And it's one of the things we must understand is that things about God, things about God's nature and character, they're not ors, they're ands. And so God is both angry and loving. But his love withholds his anger. It holds it back. And so God is slow to anger. He's bearing with us, hoping that we would come to repentance. You see, it's a both and. Because he's slow to anger and he's abounding in love. And so you say, how can he be all love if he's just? Doesn't he punish sin and injustice and weakness and wickedness? And the answer is that God hates all of those things. They're an affront to his nature and character, and God hates anything that is an affront to his nature and character. They grieve his heart. But God deals with us according to his nature, not our behavior. Because if he did, we would have no hope. But God's love is what holds back his wrath. Why? That we might turn from our sin, that we would put our faith and trust in Jesus, and that we would begin to look more and more like Jesus. We talked at the beginning about shadows. That the way to see what's real is to turn on the lights. It makes everything clear. It helps us know what we're dealing with. It allows us to know where we are. And God has turned on the lights through his word, but also through his son, Jesus Christ. And John 8:12 tells us that Jesus is the light of the world. Because Jesus is God in the flesh. He is the exact representation of the nature and character of God. The theological term is the hypostatic union, that he is fully God and fully man. Those two things can coexist in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And what did the God-man do? You see, the God-man came down from heaven, entered into our world, and lived a perfect, sinless life. He was without blemish. He didn't make a mistake. He didn't sin. He didn't fall short of God's glory. But he went to the cross But I need us to understand something, and I think we overlook this sometimes. You see, he went to the cross, and the cross is where you and I should have been. We deserve to be on that cross. And here's the thing. The wrath of God, we all face the wrath of God. The question is, do we face it ourselves, or did Jesus bear it for us? You see, the theological term is penal substitutionary atonement. And here's what that means. It means that God's wrath must be paid. It must be poured out because of the nature of sin. That's how bad sin is. There's no escaping it. I think sometimes we think we just escape it. We get a free pass. That God relented and withheld his judgment. That he withheld his wrath. But the reality is God didn't withhold it. He poured it out on his son Jesus. And here's the thing. That should have been you and me. That's what we deserve. And so the cross is the perfect picture of God's wrath. God poured it out on his perfect, sinless son. Do you grasp that? The wrath of God was satisfied in the person and work of Jesus Christ. But the love of God was also fully on display on the cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. You see, the cross was an act of wrath. The question is, who's going to receive that wrath? Is it going to be poured out on Jesus on your behalf? Or are you going to have to face it and deal with it, which means eternal separation from God? Or do you see the love of God? There's a question often out there that why is there only one way to God? And let me just be transparent with you for a minute. That's the wrong question if that's where you stand. The beauty of the cross, the beauty of the gospel, the beauty of God isn't that there's one way, it's that there is any way. We don't deserve the cross. It's not something we deserve. We're not entitled to it. If anything, we deserve wrath. But God, out of his love for us, sent his perfect sinless son to die on a cross in our place for the forgiveness of our sins. And so it's the fact that there's any way. And that not only that, God provided the way. That he would be both the just and the justifier. And so the cross is an expression of God's wrath, but it's also an expression of God's love. And so if you've never put your faith and trust in Jesus, all you have to do, and Pastor Marcus and I will be down here at the close of service, all you have to do is say, Lord, I'm a sinner, and I have fallen short of your glory, and I'm asking Jesus to come into my life and save me. And if that's a decision you want to make, please come talk to us. We'll be down here, and then we'll be at the Welcome Center. It would be our joy to talk to you about a relationship with Jesus Christ. But what about the rest of us? Those who know Jesus, those who have a relationship with him. And yet, much like myself, we can be quick to anger and slow to love. The love can be conditional. Our spouse didn't measure up. We got home and the meal wasn't ready. The kids misbehaved. They didn't listen. Maybe we work with difficult people who have said mean things. Maybe we have a neighbor who is only concerned about themselves. So they play their music really loud at night and keep everybody up. You see, the temptation It's towards anger. It's towards vengeance. But vengeance is the Lord's. You see, the cross frees us from the need to extract vengeance. The cross frees us from the need to bring wrath and judgment and anger to every situation and circumstance we're in. The cross frees us to be like Jesus. After all, Christian, it means little Christ. Because at the end of the day, the Lord's going to take care of it. That person that wronged you, that person that offended you, God's going to take care of it. That thing that made you upset, God's got it. It may sound callous, but that's where we trust God. In James chapter 5, 8 through 10, it says to establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. So practically, I want to give us a couple things of what this looks like. We think long term. Judgment is coming. God has a plan, and he's going to work his plan. We understand our own journey. Think about where you started when God got a hold of your heart. Think about what life was like before you came to Christ and how God has bared with you, how others have bared with you, and how God has transformed you slowly, 1 degree at a time. And then lastly, know that God has a plan. There will come a time where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Here's the thing. Some are bowing in worship and others are bowing in judgment. But the cross, it frees us and it allows us to be slow to anger and to abound in love. Let's pray.